My name is David Gahl. I'm the Deputy Director of Environmental Advocates of New York. And as you all know, we are in the midst of the NFL playoffs. So that means, in the spirit of the season, the environmental groups represented here and actually across the state have come together to release what we're calling the 2012 Green Playbook. This is the advice from New York's environmental organizations for the governor and the state legislature. We are releasing today our 10 winning plays for the governor and the legislature. So, as many of you know, the National Football League teams script out their 10 to 15 plays at the beginning of a game. We're doing the same thing, and we're actually so confident in our agenda that we are showing you what our plays are before the season starts. So, seriously, there are a couple of common. This agenda basically addresses some high-profile issues. We have measures to protect New York State from hydrofracking. We have measures to protect New York State from the ravages of climate change. We also have important initiatives for increasing environmental funding. And I think there are probably two themes that you should keep in mind when you're looking at the agenda. The first theme is that the environment and economic development can go hand in hand. And the items that are included here are often both measures that will protect our natural resources and, in addition, create green jobs and spur economic development. I think the second major theme of this agenda today is our political leaders have a choice, some important choices ahead of them. First, they can choose between the dirty fossil fuel policies of the past, or we can embrace clean energy for New York's future. And so those are the underlying themes throughout this agenda. As I said earlier, environmental advocates played the role of convener for this publication. We have 15 environmental groups from across the state. You can see them listed in your packet on the second to last page that participated in the drafting, discussions around these particular initiatives for the legislature and the governor. And so this was really a group effort, and we thank everybody for participating today and for participating in this exercise. Finally, with me today, I have a whole range of environmental advocates, and so in the theme of NFL playoffs, I'm showing you the playbook for today. So here we have, we're going to start with Roger Downs, who's the Conservation Director for the Sierra Club Atlantic chapter. Roger's going to talk about fracking, and then we're moving on to Bill Cooke with Citizens Campaign for the Environment. Bill's going to talk about solar initiatives. Following Bill, we'll have Dan Hendrick, who's the Communications Director for the New York League of Conservation Voters. Dan's going to talk about the importance of environmental funding. And then finally, we're going to have Nadine Lemmon from Tri-State Transportation Campaign. See, Nadine has a long way to go here. So Nadine's going to talk about the importance of transit funding. And then I'm going to wrap up the program today and talk a little bit about climate change. So without any further introduction, let me turn it over to Roger.
Thank you. As you all probably know, yesterday the public comment period closed for the SGEIS on high volume horizontal hydraulic fracturing. And while the DEC wades through the tens of thousands of public comments they received, we're here to say that the legislature now has a role to play. Last year, we would like to have perhaps thrown a yellow flag called the Senate for holding. There were more than 24 legislative initiatives before the legislature. The Assembly acted on 3 very important initiatives. But this year, based on what the Senate said last year, they said, we want to wait for the DEC to see what they come up with before we act. It's very clear now what the DEC intends to do. And they've identified several areas that they either refuse to act on or they feel that they don't have the statutory authority to act on. And we see these as clear deficiencies in moving forward on hydrofracking. The first is the hazardous waste loophole. In New York, fracking materials, the fracking chemicals, can arrive at the site as listed hazardous materials with all the manifests. It gets pumped down, the borehole comes back up, and through regulation, it is washed of that determination. State regulation says that fracking waste, drilling waste of any kind, can never be considered hazardous. This is a clear loophole, and we need to change it because there is the threat of waste coming from Pennsylvania, and that it can't be a comprehensive policy unless we address it now in New York. Secondly, the SGEIS on fracking refused to acknowledge any public health risk. There is no public health study. And we are calling upon the legislature to order a public health risk assessment to be conducted independently to make sure that all New Yorkers are protected, and we do not want to see the issuance of any permits until there is that public health risk assessment. We have seen public health crises in other states, and we don't want that to happen to New York. And lastly is the issue of local control, municipalities having to deal with the onslaught of drilling and having all the tools at their disposal to deal with it on their own terms. The department has deemed that the environmental conservation law supersedes all local control, and there are many communities, over 24 now, that have instituted some form of land use control, whether it's through zoning, whether it's a ban or a moratorium, and they are now being challenged by the industry. We want to push forward a bill sponsored by Jim Seward and Barbara Lifton. It has bipartisan support, and it just clarifies that New York's upstate communities have the right to implement zoning, have the right to implement ordinances, because ultimately natural gas development in New York State will be an unfunded mandate on communities unless they can deal with it on their own terms. So these are 3 bills that we think the legislature can get done this year and will substantially fill gaps in the SGEIS. Thanks.
I want to thank environmental advocates for the work they've done on this. We think it's important to lay out the priorities for the legislative session that has just started. I want to talk about the solar jobs opportunity. Roger talked to you about what the state's doing on hydrofracking. We have choices in front of us. We can continue down that old road and think that our energy should come from stuff buried in the dirt. Or we can turn the page and start to embrace the real future of energy in New York, which is clearly solar. The legislature and the governor's office have an opportunity this year to enact legislation that will foster this industry, that will help remove impediments, that will make the rollout of solar faster, smoother, better. There is overwhelming public support for solar power. It is clearly one of the cleanest ways to generate electricity that we are ever going to see in our lifetimes. New York is falling behind many other states, and it is needless. There's an opportunity to fix the problem. There's an opportunity to create thousands of jobs here in New York. So with the natural gas, with the hydrofracking issue, we can pull stuff out of the ground with a lot of poison and then send that gas to China, or we can embrace solar technology, solar development here in New York, solar installation here in New York, jobs here in New York. That's a pretty clear choice. But we need legislative action. We need the governor's office to be a participant to help get this done. But at the end of the day, we have an opportunity. Every year we delay costs New York jobs, costs New York air quality. The other really great thing about solar power is every single solar panel you put in necessarily drives the price of fossil fuels in a downward direction. Solar is predictable. There are no price spikes. There are no fuel spikes. There is no availability problem. The sun is shining. We think the legislature should focus on solar jobs bill this session, get it done, and help New York's economy, help New York's energy future, help New York's families.